I'm going to go to the slave auction. And what I did not ever want to do, and my brother Joseph too, and George Washington didn't do this, is sell overage. Now how many say I have no idea what overage even means and what that is? You're over the age of 55, aren't you? No, he's not over the age of 55. Okay, anyway, a lot of times at the age of 55, they don't work much anymore. Sometimes the life of a slave can be up to the 50s. She is only 4 years old. I know that's hard for you to imagine. How much work is she going to do for me? None. Who's going to provide for her if she gets sick? Who's provide her clothing? Who's going to feed for her? Me. Some slave owners would take their overage and sell them. Which means if this was the father of this young 4-year-old, he'd lose his daughter. You may sit down. No, stand up. Now, let's pretend that he has a skill, he's a carpenter. In 1850, I might spend $1,200 for him. She is 21. Never been married, never jumped over the broom. She's also got a skill that she can cook. She might be worth anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500. Thank you. If I own 199 slaves, let me think a lot of my capital is tied up in that. Now, for me, as a representative, because I was elected to the House in 1845, the Senate in 1847, by the legislature, of course, and 57. Now, a representative does what? Do they vote the way they think or the way their constituents should think? Which ones? Combination of both. So who do I represent? Now, I want you to think about something else. Who's going to be your representatives from Mississippi? Joe Dirt Kicker? Or the wealthy owner? Who are you going to elect? Now think about it. Be honest. Don't sit there and they say, well, they should do this. Does Joe Dirt Kicker even have the money to stop being a farmer, to go out there and campaign? No. Who are you going to elect? Wealthy people. Now think about most of these representatives in the South, in the House of Representatives, and in the Senate, from 1789 to 1860. Now let me ask you another question. When was the United States born? 1776. Well, let's put it this way. I'll tell you why some people give answers. Some people say July 4, 1776, we gained our independence. Some people will say September 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. Some people say with the Articles of Confederation. Other people say April 30th, 1789. Now, you know why April 30th, 1789 is such an important date? Nope.
George Washington was inaugurated.
That's right. George Washington was inaugurated. Not inebriated. Inaugurated. Well, I doubt it. It's George Washington. He's perfect. No, even though he did sell whiskey on his plantation. Now, let's get up to 1843. My brother saw that I was lonely and unmarried. Now, I've been without a woman now for 8 years. Well, one of his best friends was a guy named William Howe, his wife Margaret. In fact, they were such good friends, the Howes named their first male child Joseph. Their second child was a female named Verena. He said, I want you to go over to your sister's plantation and tell Verena how you're going to pick her up the next day, because I was an elector for the campaign coming up, presidential campaign, Oak in 44. you're familiar, James, not poker course. So anyway, you know, sometimes when she saw me ride up, she saw this erect man. And when I saw her, I gave her that look. You know what that means when you give that look? That's what I did. I gave her that look, she gave me that look back. There was something inside of me that happened that hasn't happened to me for almost 10 years. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? So the next day I picked her up, took her to the Hurricane, his plantation, and we talked for hours, and boy could she sing. She was 16. I was 34. By the time, now we do have a place where before she left, we were engaged. But she did write her mother a letter. And she said, when Jefferson states an opinion, he just assumes everyone agrees with him, and there's some times I don't. That hurt. And you know what else she said? And besides that, he's a Democrat. Democrat. Because she was a Whig. Now, could she vote? No. She couldn't vote. But she was trained by George Winchester, a lawyer. And she read. And the thing of it is, what a man likes usually happens before you get married. After you get married, it changes. You're thinking, oh no, what's he going to say, aren't you? That's what you're thinking. They love to listen to, she loved to listen to me talk. And she actually listened and could respond. Now the longer, and eventually, you know, she left, went back home in Manassas, Mississippi. And every time I wanted to visit her, guess what? She was sick. Now every time you get a letter that says, I'm getting ready to come, and they replied they're sick, what does that start to go through your head?
She's not that into me.
Whatever that means. Anyway, I finally did go up there, but she had to convince her mother to see I was only 2 years younger than her mother. What? Anyway, we were married in the Episcopalian church. Remember I said I was Baptist. Episcopalian church in Natchez, and we went on a honeymoon down in New Orleans. And we stopped in Louisiana, of course, to visit Sarah Knox Taylor. What a way to start out a marriage. She understood. We went to see my sister on the way, and of course, Sarah was buried here, so we did see that. Part of, you know, the thing of it is, for a woman in a second marriage, how do you compete against someone that was only married to your husband 3 months? They weren't married long enough to have any problems. So the minute you have problems in that marriage, the husband's going to say something really brilliant like, well, I never had this issue, right? Yeah, I know. I'm getting those looks again. That's the kind of look she gave me sometimes. But anyway, I got elected to the House of Representatives, and we got ready to go to Washington City. And when we did, it was the winter in January, because you are put into term in 46 and 47. And we went up the river on a steamboat, then had to cross Ohio and so forth, sled. And you know what, sometimes it's difficult to find facilities to use to, you know what I'm talking about, especially more for the women than the men at times. So anyway, we got to Washington City, and Marina thought the streets were going to be paved in gold, and what she found is a load of manure. The streets, garbage all over the place, half-finished monuments. Oh, cat manure, dog manure, goat manure, hog manure, sheep manure, especially horse manure. Sometimes you'd walk along a house and they'd be empty in chamber pots. You'd be careful, you might have manure on your head. But you know what? In that House of Representatives, junior House members are supposed to do what?
Listen
be
and
seen
learn.
and not heard right away. I wasn't like that. I wanted to be seen, I wanted to be heard, so I gave a speech about the war, coming war with Mexico. Because I knew it was coming, being in the military. And I said it should not be up to a blacksmith or a tailor. Now there was a tailor from Tennessee that listened to me give that speech and he was offended by it. You know what his name was?
Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson. He did not like that I said that. Talked to me, and from then on I thought he was a plebeian, and he thought I was some, he did not like the planter class, and you know, I was in the planter class. Hated me from then on. And you know, that's going to catch up with me in 20 years. You realize that. Well, anyway, I told Verena, I said, I will not be going back being a soldier, but guess what happened? I went off and fought in the Mexican War. And at one time I had to take leave and come back and settle a dispute between her and Joseph. Because Joseph liked women just to be seen and not heard. And Verena, she's a little feisty, independent, and a mind of her own, and she didn't like her husband's older brother trying to tell her what to do all the time. So I had to settle that dispute. But the thing of it is, I was very close to Joseph, I was very close to Verena. Well, when I got close to Verena, I got distant from Joseph. When I got close to Joseph, I got distant from Marina, because in a sense, they didn't like each other. I was going to catch up. I come back from the war, and I'm placed in the Senate, voted in the Senate by the legislature of Mississippi, 47 to 51, and in 51, I resigned from the Senate to run for governor, and I lost. And Verena said, you know, now, we were in Washington City quite a bit. What do you think was happening to our plantation? You think it was kept up like it should have been? Just like when Washington went off the revolution for 8 years and then came back for a few years, went off to be president for 8 years. Anyway, I said, we're finished. Well, we have an election of 52. Franklin Pierce, who I knew from the Mexican War, became the Democratic nominee and won the presidency. Guess what? Now think about it, my former father-in-law was president in 1850 and died. I did not support him in 48 because he was a Whig. But anyway, Pierce said, I'd like you to be my Secretary of War. And I said, no. And Verena said, make sure you tell him no. And I told him no 3 times. Then he invited me up to Washington City for his inauguration. And he asked me again. And guess what I said? Yes, I do know. I did. So we moved up to Washington City. Now, as Secretary of War, some people might talk about my camels out west. They might talk about the Capitol being remodeled at certain points inside and outside. It had a lot to do with that. The Smithsonian. People don't know some of those accomplishments that I did. Like I said at the beginning of this, some people think I was born in 1861 and died in 1865. No more Secretary of War. And the day after that, I was again elected by the legislature to the Senate. But March 5th, 1857, the Dred Scott decision came down. Dred Scott was owned by an army man named John Emerson that went from post to post to post and free territory and free territory and free territory. John said, Dred, take me home. I think I'm dying. He did die. Now, his wife, what do you think she wanted to do with Dred? Selling. Dred started suing in courts starting in 1847 and finally reached the Supreme Court in 1857. And Roger Taney wrote the majority opinion and said, Dred, you're a Negro. You could not sue, you're not even citizens of the United States. Now, the thing of it is, when you're having struggles between North and South, I mean, in 1820, we have the Missouri Compromise, and we have 15 slave states, 15 free states. By 1850, California says, I want to come in the Union as a free state. What free state was going to come in for the South? No one. That's why it's called the Compromise of 1850. They did another fugitive slave law. See, when laws aren't enforced, people said they ought to make a law against that. Oh, they do that all the time, don't they? Just enforce the laws you have. The problem with the fugitive slave law is this. Married or related or anything? You are now. This is a true story I read somewhere, and I don't know the circumstances. You're a judge. Your job as a judge is to uphold the laws and go and take into court those people that break the fugitive slave law. You come home to surprise your wife at lunchtime, and you find out she's harboring slaves, and your house has been a link on the Underground Railroad. What do you do? Do you prosecute her?
No, she's right.
Yeah, but she broke the law.
Yeah.
So, you take the law lightly? Fugitive, what I'm trying to say to you is that fugitive slave law made things very complicated for the South. And the thing of it is, really what caused the war is extremists on both sides. Who's the extremists on the southern side? Fire eaters. They want secession, they want secession, they want secession. Now, get away from those Yankees. We don't need them. Who's the extremist in the north? Abolitionists. Ask Lincoln if he was an abolitionist, what do you think he'll say? No. They wanted slaves freed immediately. Now, let me share something with you. We had in Mississippi a population, over 50% of our population were slaves and free blacks. So the abolitionists had their way. Of course, you had different forms of an abolitionist. The abolitionist just wants them free, that's it, don't care. Abolitionists want them free and possibly some males to be able to vote. Some abolitionists said we want equality. That's a whole big problem to begin with these two words, they're ugly. Superior and inferior. And you might say, well, who do they think was the most inferior people in 1860? People called them savages. And you know what? Let me share something with you. Who was the most savage? Here we got English people coming over, settling in a swamp area. They called Jamestown after their king. And the men go off the ship and start digging for gold, don't have enough sense to start to build homes and plant crops. And the natives come and save them. Who do you think was the most savage? We have a problem there. So in a sense, as if I sum up my talk, because I'm not going to go past 1862, if that's okay with you. Let's see what time it is, because somebody say, well, I want to know what happened here. Okay, I might change it. The problem is this. Did we live up to the creed Jefferson wrote, my namesake? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights that can't be taken away. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or as George Mason said, pursuit of property. To Southerners, the Fifth Amendment guarantees your property rights. And if you have a fear of the federal government taking your property without compensation, how do you think you want to treat the federal government? Poorly. So we have the abolitionists one way and we have the fire eaters the other way. Who is in the middle? Probably the majority of people. And if you want to know my politics, even though I was a Democrat, I was considered a moderate. They didn't elect Louis Wigfall to be president, provisional president, did they? Or Robert Toombs. They elected me. And my vice president, who will kind of fade away, Alexander Stephens, who knew Lincoln in the House of Representatives, we kind of separated. He gave a speech called the Cornerstone Speech. How many are familiar with the Cornerstone Speech? Nobody is? He said, the cornerstone of the Confederacy is the writers of the Declaration of Independence had it all wrong. The Negro is not equal to the white man. And see, the thing of it is, that's going to be a struggle through the whole war period. When I come out and say we need some of these men to fight for us, there's others saying, well, what are we fighting the war for? Because the thing of it is, married couples is just like the North and the South. Now think about it. Do you always agree? And sometimes you agree and you're still disagreeing because you argue differently. I'm just talking about Marina, so if you want to throw tomatoes at me, don't. A lot of women I've been with argue from the heart. Men argue with facts and logic. So a woman will say, that just doesn't feel right. They don't care what the facts are. It doesn't feel right. Even in the reception line at times, Marina, there was men be coming along shaking my hands and saying, you're a dictator. Because what I wanted to do is unite those 11. Did I say 15? Because there's 4 states that stayed in the Union that still kept slavery. Did you realize that?
Mm-hmm.
Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. Now, you might say, well, how do you get your 13 stars? Missouri and Kentucky sent representatives to the Confederate Congress. That's where we get 13. So,
what time is it?
Now you can see that somebody's coming by arguing with me about violating states' rights with Conscription Act, and me and the Senate coming up with the pending writ of habeas corpus. How do I know who's loyal to the Confederacy? You don't know. How many has heard of the Loyalists in the American Revolution? Did you know at that time period there was 1/3 that didn't care, 1/3 that was loyalists, and 1/3 that was patriots? And with the help of France, we won the revolution. And the Confederacy wanted the help of France and England. They did not help us. You know what that one reason is? S-L-A-V-E-R-Y. Slavery. So if we would have freed our slaves before the war, think about that. But what happened is, November of 1860, the Republican platform said no extension of slavery in the new territories. Now cotton wears out the soil. What did a lot of those planters want to do? Move? Couldn't, because they couldn't take their property with them. Now you might say, well, this is this. Well, the Constitution read this. And the Constitution is set in stone until you amend it. Can you amend it? Can that Dred Scott decision be reversed? And was it? Yes. 14th Amendment gave citizenship to those people. 13th abolished slavery. 15th allowed men to vote. You amend the Constitution. So Lincoln on that platform and those southern states said, if that Republican wins the nomination or wins the election, we're out of here. Starting in South Carolina first. And that's when they formed 6 states formed the Confederacy. Texas will join later. Sam Houston had something to say about that. And they said, they quoted Ben Franklin, who said, we either hang separately or we hang together. So anyway, they select me, and when I find out, first of all, I resigned from the Senate because my state called me home. There's one senator, his state called him home. He didn't go home. You know where he's from? Tennessee. You know what his name was? Andrew Johnson. God help us if he ever would become president. Right? A Taylor. Couldn't even hardly read. You know what? The Republican Party hated their name so much that they didn't even call themselves the Republican Party in '64. They called it the National Union Party. That's why he is a Democrat put on the ticket. You guys realize that, don't you? He was a Democrat put on a Republican ticket, which is the National Union Party. So anyway, I get this telegram and I read it, and Rena's looking at me because I'm cutting rows. You ever get cut in those thorns when you're cutting? That's what you cut. Had the telegram in my hand and I'm looking, I'm reading it. You should have seen my face. You think it was happy? Think it was happy? Think it was sad? Yes. She thought, oh no, somebody important had died. By the way, my mother died in 1845 in October. Well, she was born in 1758 or 9, somewhere in there. Yeah, she lived to be pretty old. But I was still her little boy, even though I was 6 foot tall. she wasn't as tall as I was. Anyway, I read that telegram saying, report to Montgomery as provisional president. And then I was elected in November of '61 as a 6-year term. Did I fulfill that 6-year term? Somebody asked me a while back, why not? There's a whole bunch of the story you didn't listen to, and so forth. Let's see what time it is, because I know there's a fashion show coming, and I do not want people sitting. Then Mr. Lincoln's going to be speaking at 2 o'clock, and tomorrow in town, under that big tent, we are going to have a press conference, which is good. Did I dance beside you last night? Huh? I think I did.
So did you and President Lincoln interact
No,
at
we
all?
never met each other. No, never met the man.
We're not there now.
Yeah, something to chat
By privy. Necessary. You know what a necessary. How many know what a necessary is?
WC.
Okay, well, let me finish up. I'm going to finish up in 5 minutes. First of all, I believed there was going to be a war. Being Secretary of War, I knew what the Union could do. But the thing of it is, when Lincoln was elected in November, and South Carolina seceded in December 20th, and Virginia or Mississippi followed January 8th, and so forth. 7 states had seceded by the time he's inaugurated on March 4th. What did James Buchanan do about secession?
Nothing.
Why didn't he do anything about secession?
He thought whoever comes afterwards, it can.
Well, how about this? The argument is this. People come up to me all the time and say this, and I just kind of grin. It says in the Constitution that a state can succeed. Secede, not succeed. Okay? Secede. You'd be surprised what I've heard. I have people come up to me and say they can or cannot, according to the Constitution. I said, well, get your Constitution out and you bring that back to me. One lady was a PhD, and she came back 3 hours later. She said, I read the whole darn thing. Do you know it's not in there? Of course I know it's not in there. Why do you think I said go find it? It's not in there. Why? Why would they not put that in the Constitution? I'll answer that question.
Because we were
If
just
you're
seceding
building
out of
a-
India. Out of England.
Do you talk about how you're going to uncreate it? Disabolish it? No. When you get married, does it say, till you get tired of each other, which might be in 10 days? Because there's a time you love them, but you just don't like them for a while. They're moody, depressed. Is that true? Okay, I don't want tomatoes thrown at me. It does not say that. So, the whole thing is, what is the proof of secession? So my philosophy is this. If you join a compact voluntarily, why can't you leave voluntarily? And let's put it this way. After the war, before the war's over, April 2nd, Robert E. Lee sends me a telegram, says, Petersburg has fallen, you need to evacuate Richmond, we can't hold it. I don't know if you realize how much of an army is used to keep a capital safe. Even the Battle of Manassas, all those Union troops surrounding. Why do you think Maryland is not a seceded state? Because Lincoln made sure they didn't secede. Otherwise, you'd have Washington City in the middle of 2 states in the Confederacy. Lincoln gets assassinated on April 14th. Lee surrenders on Palm Sunday, April 9th, Sunday. I get the message, it's really a sad message because Lee and his troops are paroled. You know what that means? They can't fight no more. He went back to Richmond. Go to his house in Richmond. He's no good to the Confederacy. Paroled. The soldiers would have provisions and train rides back to their homes. I get the news he's assassinated me. Johnson becomes president, puts $100,000 on my head, implicating me in that assassination. I spent 2 years at Fort Monroe, starting out in chains. Eventually, Marina would come and spend time with me that last year. I did not see my children for 2 years. At the end of that 2 years, I wanted a trial because they were trying me for treason, right? Wouldn't give me a trial. The new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Salmon Chase, who used to be Lincoln's Secretary of Treasury, said, "What happens if we try him and he wins?" What did that mean to over 600,000 that served in the Union and Confederate armies? What would that mean if I won? 1869, the Supreme Court will make a decision that says states cannot secede from the Union. Now, I didn't talk to any of you about my children, and it's 10 till. So you'll have to ask me, I'll say it in about a minute. We had 6. Samuel Emery, born 1854 or 1852 and died in 1854 of a fever. Named him Samuel Emery. 1855 we had Margaret, and she will produce grandchildren. We have then Jefferson Jr., born in 57, will die as a 21-year-old in Memphis. We have Joseph, born in 59. That was an argument with Marina. She wanted him named William, and I won. Joseph, born in 59, dies April 30th, 1864, when he falls off the veranda and dies. William, born in November of 61, will die in 1872. So, my time at Beauvoir, I have 2 children out of my 6 remaining, both my daughters. So, I want to introduce, come on up here, Abraham. Abraham Lincoln. Don't call him Spotty Lincoln, because he don't want to talk about that time he was in the
doesn't know what he's speaking of. I just made a mistake.
To 49, that wanted to know the exact spot that Lincoln was, or where the Mexican War started. It's real simple, as the Nueces and the Rio Grande, and Polk put soldiers there. That's the exact spot, Mr. Lincoln, right there, and that's when the war started, because Rio Grande, the Mexicans under Santa Anna thought it was the Nueces. So anyway, he's going to be speaking at 2, and tomorrow, somewhere between 11 and 2, we're going to be
Having a press conference. We will not be arguing with each other. We will be answering the same question, like, where were you born? Tell me about your family, and who do you admire, and what do you hope will happen at the end of the war, and things like that. And we'll also open up the floor for questions. Any of you have questions? Yes, it produces a lot more light and a lot less heat. You learn more about both of us fellers than doing it the other way.